What we've not talked about yet very much, and this is what I would like to address, is why. Why are those faiths under fire? What are they under fire from? What is it that is causing the persecution? What is driving the persecution? Because that is what we need to focus on if we're going to have an effect on supporting those faiths, those churches that are under fire. So I'm calling this Islamic persecution of religious minorities, doctrine and history. This is where it comes from. I'd like to wrap up for you a little bit why you're seeing everything that you're seeing across the Middle East happening the way it is happening now, and now in the United States as well. What is happening to the Copts, the Jews, the Baha'is, and other persecuted minority faiths across the Middle East, where Sharia is dominated, whereas dominant and enforced, is not unique to our time. Sometimes it might feel like we're living in a snapshot of time. This is our time, and we think this is unique, this is different, this is our time. Well, it's not unique. What is happening now belongs on a continuum, and that continuum is about 1,400 years long at this point. And what I would say is that the situation of these persecuted minority faiths under fire is just the latest in a long and bloody history of Islamic conquest, and it is always characterized by the subjugation of non-Muslim religious minorities. The great scholar and historian of Islamic history, and a medical doctor as well, I don't know where he gets the time, Andrew Bostom, has documented in extensive detail in two massive compendia books about these conquests. One is called The Legacy of Jihad, the other one is called The Legacy of Islamic Anti-Semitism. He has now written a third book, which is due out soon, and you'll see that one very, very shortly. But what he documents is the Islamic conquest from the very earliest campaigns after the death of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, and the pattern of the treatment of non-Muslims and how that was set. What we are seeing today is a continuation of what was begun at the earliest time after the beginning of Islam and the death of Muhammad, during the life of Muhammad as well. Both Muhammad's example and Quranic verses cited to this day as justification to attack and oppress non-Muslims. This goes to the guilt of not being Muslim, the guilt of not accepting Islam. That is why these groups and these faiths are persecuted, because they are not Muslim. The Quran, as I think one of the earlier speakers mentioned, contains at least 109 verses that call Muslims to war with non-believers. Muslims are actually warned of hellfire that awaits them if they fail to join in the slaughter. The verses are open-ended in terms of time and place. They are not restricted to somewhere in the Middle East in a long ago time in the Arabian Peninsula, let's say. Let me highlight, I'm not going to go through 109, don't worry, but let me highlight just a few of them for you, and you'll get a flavor of what we're talking about. Here is Quran verse 2, 191 to 193. Slay them wherever you find them, and drive them out of the places whence they drove you out, for persecution is worse than slaughter. Let's look at Quran 2, 2:16. Fighting is prescribed for you, and you dislike it, but it is possible that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you love a thing which is bad for you, but Allah knoweth best, and ye know not. Okay, does this sound like a religion of peace? Does this sound like a struggle for mental betterment of oneself? Here is Quran verse 3, 151. Soon we shall cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they joined companions with Allah, for which he had sent no authority. Let's skip a couple. I'm not going to go through them all. Here is another one about casting terror. This is Quran 8:12, one of the most often cited of all of these. I will cast terror. This is Allah speaking, right? When you're talking about the Quran, whose voice is it written in? It is the voice of Allah. That is whose voice is speaking through the Quran. And it says in 8:12, I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore, strike off all their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. Religion of peace. 839, fight them until there is no more fitna. That means disorder, civil strife, disbelief. And religion shall only be for Allah, meaning in the entire world. Last two, and very important as regards Christians and Jews, otherwise sometimes known as the people of the book. Here is 9:5. So when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captives, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. That is totally open-ended. It doesn't say only on the Arabian Peninsula. It doesn't say only the pagans who worship idols. It doesn't say only until the year 700 or whatever. Here is 929, the last one I'll cite to you. And this is the one that most closely relates to Christians and Jews. Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, that means Islam, even if they are people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. What are they saying? They're saying even if you have a revealed scripture, as Muslims acknowledge that Jews and Christians do have a revealed scripture in the Bible, the Old and the New Testaments, even so, unless they submit to Islam, unless they allow themselves to be governed and ruled by Islamic law, they must be subdued, they must be humiliated and feel it and pay the jizya. You heard, I think maybe it was Paul earlier speaking about the jizya payment, which is an obligatory tax on non-Muslims. It is a tax in return for their lives, which are forfeit otherwise. So this is the foundation. I haven't even touched on the hadiths. I haven't even touched on the life, the sayings of Muhammad, which are contained in the hadiths. But those together, the life of Muhammad, the sirah, the biography, Ibn Ishaq is one key biographer, and his sayings and actions in life together make up what is called the Sunnah. The Quran and the Sunnah together guide the lives and the laws of Islam and Muslims to this day. Let's talk a little bit about the compact of the jizya. What does that mean, and why are we hearing that again today being demanded in Egypt and other places, but especially I've heard it in Egypt? The compact of the jizya comes from that verse I just quoted to you, 9:29, that the people of the book must be subjugated until they pay this obligatory tax to the Muslim overlords and feel themselves subdued. What does that mean? It means that they must accept Muslim ownership of their land. They must submit to Islamic law, pay this jizya tax on an annual basis. It's an annual tax levied on each person, each man, free man. The purpose, why? To make life as non-Muslims so bitter, so humiliating, and so worthless that conversion seems better, or at a minimum, that submission to Islamic law seems a better alternative than living this way. That is the purpose of what is happening in the Middle East today. It's the purpose of what has been happening for the last 1,400 years against the minority faiths, the Christians, the Jews, and others. The second caliph was named Umar. And you heard earlier this morning, Cynthia was talking about the pact that has become known as the Pact of Umar. That caliph, the second caliph, had overrun after the death of Muhammad, so many lands of the Middle East, not just what became the Arabian Peninsula, but the entire Middle East, which was in the majority, and still at that time then, Jewish and Christian, that he had to have some way of dealing with all of these conquered peoples. They were not going to murder every last one of them, we're talking millions, and they were not going to convert them. So they said, okay, you can have a third choice. Third choice, by the way, title of a very excellent book by Mark Dury, which describes exactly what I'm going to talk to you about. The third choice, you do not have to convert or die, you may submit. That's the third choice. And so the second Caliph Umar created something known as the Pact of Umar. It's become known to us, at least, as the Pact of Umar. And it can be found in Islamic books of law. The one that I use for reference happens to be a Shafi book of law. You heard Cynthia talk about the four schools, on the Sunni side at least, the Shafi, the Maliki, the Hanbali, the Hanafi. And this one, called The Reliance of the Traveler, or in Arabic, the Umdat al-Salik, I find a very handy reference. It can be found on Amazon. cheaply, used. That's how I buy all my books, or I'd never afford them. But it is available very easily, and it is organized in a kind of a neat way according to chapters that I find easy to look things up in. So in that book is an entire chapter called the Ahladimma. The Ahladimma means the Dhimmi people. That's what that means in Arabic, and it is about the Pact of Umar and the agreement between the Muslim conquerors and those people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, and primarily, who were overrun and taken over. And their agreement to abide by every single one of the regulations on this pact, on this list of regulations, humiliating, having to do with clothing, having to do with cutting your hair in a funny way so that everybody can see you coming. And by the way, that yellow Star of David on Jews, where did that come from? Not Hitler. It comes from the Pact of Umar, where Jews were required to wear a patch, yellow, front and back, so that Muslim would see them coming and know ahead of time that these are people who may be abused. Christians also had to wear a similar patch, but a different color. I think theirs might have been blue. So this is the Pact of Umar. This is the beginning of how the regulations were set out by Muslim conquerors of Jewish and Christian people for their subjugation under Islamic law. So in the beginning, when the armies of Muhammad took over the first neighborhood, if you will, around Mecca and Medina, that is the peninsula that now we call the Arab Peninsula, the Jews and the pagan inhabitants there, because they were the majority, the Jewish tribes were quite powerful actually, they were the first ones to experience the broken truces, the brutal assaults, the slaughter, the genocide, and the exile. Jew hatred in particular is absolutely intrinsic to Islam and from the beginning. And why? Because the powerful Jewish tribes around Mecca and Medina refused to accept the message of Muhammad, and in fact they even not only refused him, but they ridiculed him and made fun of him. Jews were called apes and pigs in several different verses within the Quran. They are reviled in very many ways throughout the Quran. You may have heard this phrase, this kind of chant, Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad, Ya Sayyid. This is even heard on the streets of the United States of America. What this is referring to is Khaybar. Khaybar was an oasis. It is a place where some of the tribes defeated by Muhammad fled to get away from him. Just get on your camels and go, he said, and off they went. They said, just leave us alone, we'll live and we'll farm here. He chased them down. He followed them. He broke the truce. He came to Khaybar, the oasis of Khaybar. That is the armies of Muhammad returning, and he slaughtered them. Let me talk especially about the pernicious and especially viciously violent Persian Shiite dynasties, especially in the period after the 1500s, and in particular as regards Jews, but also as regards Christians. There was a concept called najis. It means uncleanliness. And if you can believe this, this is the rules. They talked about the fact that Jews, especially, but Christians too, would not be allowed to go outside while there was rain or snow coming down, because the dripping water could fall off of them and their clothes and perhaps drop onto a Muslim or a Muslim's clothing. And that would make the Muslim unclean. This was a law in Shiite Persia, that they would not be allowed to go outside while it was raining or snowing for fear that their uncleanliness, najis, would get on a Muslim. But of course, there are so many other civilizations that were conquered and dominated. The Byzantines, also the Persians, the Egyptian Copts in their turn, the Algerian, Berber, Kabyle people, they all followed. Let me give a special mention here right now. I want to talk about the Baha'is of Iran, of what was then known as Persia. The founder of this faith, it is a monotheistic faith, was called Baha'u'llah. He's a Persian nobleman from Tehran in the mid-19th century, the middle 1800s. He founded a faith that is monotheistic. It talks about and calls for the spiritual unity of mankind in a peaceful global society. But because he came after the Prophet Muhammad and he lured people away from Islam, he was considered an apostate and a heretic. Savage persecution by the Persian Shiite establishment followed. Tens of thousands of Baha'is have been murdered. Their literature is banned. Their jobs and university entry are denied to them. Marriages are not recognized. Their national center in Tehran was destroyed in 1955 with the government sanction. I'm talking modern times here, not just the 15, 16, 1700s. This is now. This is happening now. It became much worse after the 1979 revolution in Iran. The persecution is now an official Iranian government policy against the Baha'is. Their holy places, their shrines, their cemeteries have been desecrated and destroyed. Hundreds jailed and executed. Their basic participation in society is denied. Today, there are about 300,000 Baha'is still living in Iran. It's the largest religious minority in Iran. The Jewish population there has dwindled to a mere few tens of thousands. Religious hatred, bigotry, apostasy, heresy are the rule against these Baha'is. Guess where now the World Baha'i Center is located? In Haifa, in Israel. I was there only a few weeks ago. I saw the center. It's a magnificent building on the top of a hill at the end of a street in Haifa, and that is where the Baha'is have found refuge and tolerance for their religion. All right. Excuse me. Let's talk a little bit more about this history of conquest and blood to put this in context to how we got to where we are today. When a Muslim conqueror named Amr conquered Tripoli, Libya, in the year 643, this is just after Muhammad's death, he forced the Christian and the Jewish Berbers to give their wives and children as slaves to the Arab army. That was part of their jizya payment. Let's jump to 846. They are now at the gates of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It was sacked by the Muslims in that year. The reason today that you've got a walled city within a city of the Vatican within the city of Rome is precisely because of these attacks coming out of the Muslim world, the Muslim armies coming up into Italy. Al-Andalusia, that is the Iberian Peninsula. There was no golden age if you weren't a Muslim. The Cordoba Caliphate, which ruled for about 800 years, contained harems of thousands of captured Christian women. Slavery was the law there. Pogroms against Jews and Christians, incessant. Bati Yayor is a wonderful scholar on this topic. See her book, Islam and Dimitude. Out of the Cordoba Caliphate were incessant armed annual raids sent northward to the surviving, still Christian Spanish kingdoms, the Basque regions of what is now Spain, into France, all the way into the Rhone Valley, and over to Sicily and across the Italian coastline. Do you know that during these years of the 1500s until the late 1700s, there is an estimate that there were 1.25 million white Europeans enslaved by the Barbary pirates, we called them, the Barbary Muslim jihadis. The Western European coastline, I mean up Spain, up France, up England, was ravaged for centuries by raids coming out of the Barbary, the Tripolitan states of North Africa, that we call it today, North Africa. Afghanistan and Central Asia were Buddhist in the main, in the majority of the population. The slaughter in what was called Hind, now India, was perhaps the most massive of all. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Hindu shrines, temples razed to the ground, and people murdered. All right, why is it happening now that this is all resurgent? Why is it coming back? That's the historical framework. Why are we seeing it coming back again now? Well, I would give a few reasons. One, we've seen the end of the colonial period, which put a clamp down on it. We also saw in the last century the end of the Cold War. That also tended to tamp this down. We have seen the deep and the broad infiltration of Western education funded by Saudi and other Gulf money. We have seen the rise and the toleration of Islamic organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood. And we have seen an alliance rise up between Islam and the left. Read Jamie Glazoff on this or David Horowitz. And in the 21st century, I'm sorry to say, the United States government itself has now become penetrated, either not understanding or just outright co-opted. The Arab Spring, so-called, aided and abetted by the United States, NATO, and the West, we've seen an al-Qaeda Muslim Brotherhood takeover of the Middle East, of parts of it, and the other part of it, as Walid Faris would say, went to Iran. The secular dictators were taken down in 2011. It is the monarchs who will be targeted this year, in 2012. Monarchs in particular, meaning Jordanian monarchy and the Saudi monarchy. That is what is coming next. The reimposition of Sharia. When these forces become dominant, they take over. That historically brief interruption that actually spanned probably most of our lives in the 20th century, and we got to thinking this was normal, it was an aberration. It was an interruption. It is now ended. It's finished. The Iranian Revolution in 1979, the Arab Spring, so-called, last year, this year, and going on. In Egypt, the persecution, the assault, the attacks, the rapes, the slaughter of the Christian Copts is ongoing. The destruction of churches and monasteries, you've seen a lot of that earlier today. I will give you an interesting perspective, again, from scholar Andrew Boston, who talks about an 18th century scholar who was at Al-Azhar. His name was Sheikh Damanhuri. And he talks about how Damanhuri was upset at the construction of a church in Cairo back then in the 18th century. That means the 1700s. And the response is illustrative very much, I think, of what is going on today exactly. He calls it, as a medical doctor, pathognomonic. He means it's a disease, it's a sickness. Church constructions by Christians is viewed by some of these Muslims as a form of emasculation. That is what Damanhuri said, the sheikh from Al-Azhar. This just past week, we had a priest in Cairo. His name is Reverend Macarius Bolus. He was sentenced to, I think it's 6 months in jail. Why? For making repairs to his church, which had previously been burned by a Muslim mob. And the reason, because he built it back up 2.5 meters too tall, they said. That goes directly back to the Pact of Umar. That goes directly back to the feelings of Muslims who are feeling emasculated because the church got built too high. Church construction and repairs are considered by these Muslims an elimination of their manliness. Muslim mobs, let's go on, elsewhere in the world. Muslim mobs in Kosovo are attacking graveyard crosses and destroying churches. Jordanians, during the years between 1948, when Israel got its independence, and 1967, when they reconquered in a defensive war the lands around them that are now Judea, Samaria, Gaza. The Jerusalem Old City was under the control of the Jordanians, the Jordanian monarchy of King Hussein at that time. During that time, and again, I just got back from Israel and I've just seen this place with my own eyes again. The old city of Jerusalem and the Jewish quarter contained thousands of Jewish graves and also many, many mosques. Many synagogues. These were utterly destroyed completely by the Jordanians in that time. Nobody said a word. We just see a video this past week in Libya, in Benghazi. They're desecrating the graves, attacking crosses. You might have seen that on YouTube. All right, let's just turn very quickly, and I'll conclude here. In Syria, the Christians, oddly enough, have been protected by the Assad regime. It's very odd to think this, but the Christians there and in Iraq were both actually protected by those horrific dictators, atrocious, brutal dictators. But they know, those Christians in Syria, that if Assad is overthrown, their situation will drastically worsen. And worse than that, many of them are themselves exiles from Iraq. Assyrians and Chaldeans fled Iraq when we left, the United States left Iraq, and during the ethnic cleansing of Iraq and the assault against Christians. They now are in Syria, and where do they go now? At least part of the anti-Assad opposition is the Islamic Jihad, is Al-Qaeda, it's the Muslim Brotherhood, it's Turkey, and the United States government. All right, finally, wherever Sharia is imposed and enforced, the minorities will be subjugated and abused. It's not just about the Middle East, as you heard the congressman speaking a moment ago. It's about whether Western civilization will be merely a footnote in Islamic history, or whether we will summon the willpower to defend what our Judeo-Christian inheritors of the legacy of Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem have bequeathed to us. Thank you.